She moved to London to escape a shattered past, only to walk straight into the crosshairs of the city's most ruthless billionaire. She thought storming Jude Sterling's penthouse office uninvited would cost her job, but instead, he's demanding the one thing she swore she'd never risk again, her heart. The polished steel doors of the private executive elevator slid shut, sealing Elizabeth Sawyer inside a silent, ascending silver bullet. 47, 48, 49. The glowing digital numbers above the door ticked upward with terrifying speed, each chime a hammer blow against her racing heart. Ellie clutched a stark red cardboard folder to her chest like a shield, her knuckles bone white. She was breaking every rule in the corporate handbook. Junior analysts did not commandeer the private lift. Junior analysts absolutely did not storm the 50th floor uninvited. But as the elevator hurtled toward the top of the London skyline, Ellie knew she had completely run out of options. She was on her way to face Jude Sterling. The name alone was enough to send a cold, paralyzing shiver down the spine of anyone in the financial district. Jude Sterling was a corporate apex predator. The business tabloids called him ruthless, a cynic with a heart carved from the very marble that lined his lobby. He bought and dismantled legacy companies before his morning espresso. He terrified his board of directors. He was, by all accounts, an unapproachable, unforgiving tyrant who did not tolerate failure, interruptions, or insubordination. And Ellie was about to commit all three. 50. The elevator slowed, the physical pull of gravity briefly twisting her stomach. She closed her eyes, the phantom image of the glaring spreadsheet she had discovered 20 minutes ago, burning behind her eyelids. A catastrophic, undeniable, £1.2 million error. She had traced the agonizing line of data back to its source, and the signature on the authorization was unmistakably that of her manager, Richard Harrison. He had decimal shifted a massive offshore allocation. In 48 hours, the funds were scheduled to vanish into the corporate ether, triggering a devastating chain reaction of international compliance penalties. Going to Harrison would have been career suicide. The man was notorious for tossing his subordinates into the fire to save his own tailored suits. If she had shown him the error, he would have instantly altered the digital trail, pinning the £1 million disaster squarely on her. A cold sweat broke out across her nape. Ellie had moved to London 6 months ago, with 2 suitcases, a shattered heart, and a desperate need for a clean slate. She had clawed her way into this junior position to outrun the suffocating humiliation of her past. Escaping Derek, a man who had casually dismantled her self-worth while sleeping with her best friend, had required every ounce of her courage. Sterling Enterprises was her sanctuary. This job was her independence, her rent, her lifeline. "I am done paying for the sins of selfish men," she reminded herself fiercely, her jaw locking into a rigid line. She wasn't going to let Harrison destroy the life she had just rebuilt. There was only one authority who could stop the transfer and handle a discrepancy of this devastating magnitude. The elevator bell chimed softly. The heavy steel doors slid apart. The executive floor was a stark contrast to the chaotic bullpen of the 4th floor. It was cavernous, insulated by thick crimson carpets, and practically dripped with intimidating wealth. Floor-to-ceiling glass offered a dizzying, rain-slicked view of the city, but Ellie kept her eyes locked dead ahead on the massive, frosted glass double doors at the end of the corridor. There was no assistant at the outer mahogany desk, a stroke of terrifying luck. Ellie didn't pause. If she hesitated for even a fraction of a second, her courage would completely shatter. She marched forward, the heels of her practical pumps sinking into the carpet. She grasped the heavy chrome handles of the double doors, pushed hard, and stepped right into the lion's den. "I don't recall authorizing an intrusion," a voice struck through the vast room, low, gravelly, and vibrating with an authority that made Ellie's breath stop entirely. Jude Sterling stood by the window, a tumbler of amber liquid forgotten in his hand. The photographs in the financial pages did not do the man justice. He was dangerously, overwhelmingly striking, broad shoulders strained against the immaculate tailoring of a dark charcoal suit, his tie already discarded, the top buttons of his crisp white shirt undone to reveal the strong, tanned column of his throat. But it was his eyes that pinned her to the spot, a piercing, icy silver that seemed to strip away her professional armor and look straight into her racing, terrified heart. He exuded power, a dark, cynical, purely masculine power that immediately sent a totally inappropriate, heated shiver down her spine. "Mr. Sterling," Ellie managed, her voice remarkably steady despite the chaotic trembling of her hands. She gripped the red folder to her chest like a shield. "I apologize for the interruption, but you need to see this immediately." Jude set his glass down on his massive, obsidian desk. He didn't blink, he didn't raise his voice. He simply watched her with the predatory stillness of a panther assessing a particularly bold trespasser. "You have exactly 10 seconds to explain how you bypass security, who you are, and why I shouldn't have you forcibly removed from my building," he said, the silken threat in his tone unmistakable. Ellie stepped forward, the heels of her practical pumps sinking into the plush carpet. She refused to break eye contact. She couldn't. If she looked away from those magnetic, silver eyes, she would lose her nerve. "My name is Elizabeth Sawyer. I'm a junior analyst on the 4th floor. Security was distracted. Your assistant is inexplicably absent, and you shouldn't have me removed because I am currently the only person in this building standing between you and a £1.2 million compliance fine." A flicker of something. Surprise? Amusement? Briefly fractured the cold, hard mask of his face. Jude slowly rounded the desk, his movements fluid and deliberate. As he closed the distance between them, the sheer physical size of him became suffocating. He smelled of expensive cedar, rain, and sheer, unapologetic dominance. "1 million pounds," he repeated softly, stopping mere inches from her. The proximity was electric. Ellie felt the heat radiating from his body, a phantom caress that made her skin prickle in warning. "Yes." She shoved the red folder toward his chest, forcing him to take it. The Southeast Asian acquisition file. Richard Harrison authorized the final transfer protocols an hour ago. He misplaced a decimal in the currency conversion algorithms. If this cycles through the automated system on Friday, we breach international compliance, the acquisition voids, and we are liable for the penalty. Jude opened the folder. Silence descended on the office, heavy and thick, broken only by the sharp rustle of the paper as he flipped through her highlighted notes. Ellie watched his face, tracking the minute tightening of his jaw, the subtle flaring of his nostrils as his brilliant, ruthless mind processed the data. He saw it. She knew the exact second he saw it. The air around him dropped 10 degrees, freezing into a lethal, terrifying anger. But when he looked back up at her, the anger wasn't directed at her. Instead, those silver eyes dragged slowly, deliberately, over her face. He took in her wide, expressive hazel eyes, the soft flush of adrenaline staining her cheeks, the defiant tilt of her chin. He saw the faint trembling of her lower lip, and he saw the sheer, raw courage it took for her to stand her ground anyway. Jude Sterling had spent his entire life surrounded by sycophants, yes-men, and liars. People agreed with him to survive. Women threw themselves at his wealth, carefully curating their personalities to suit his supposed desires. Yet here stood a woman in a cheap, off-the-rack skirt, trembling like a leaf in a hurricane, practically daring him to strike her down in the name of the truth. He was utterly captivated. "Harrison signed off on this," Jude murmured, his voice dropping an octave, becoming something dark and private. "Yes, sir. And he will inevitably say, I prepared the preliminary numbers to cover his tracks, but you can check the digital timestamps on the server. I didn't touch this file until 20 minutes ago." Jude didn't move toward his computer. He didn't need to check the timestamps. He looked into Ellie's face, open, fierce, breathtakingly honest, and he knew, with absolute certainty, that she was telling the truth. He reached across his desk and pressed a single button on his intercom. "Call security to the 50th floor," he commanded, his eyes never leaving Ellie's. "Have Richard Harrison's desk cleared. Escort him from the premises immediately. If he asks why, tell him his severance package is currently paying off a £1 million mistake." "He is fired." Ellie let out a shaky exhale, her knees nearly giving out. She had done it. She was safe. The disaster was averted. Thank you, Mr. Sterling, she whispered, taking a clumsy step back, suddenly desperate to escape the overwhelming gravitational pull of his presence. I'll just go back to my desk now. No, you won't. The command cracked through the air like a whip. Ellie froze. Jude tossed the red folder onto his desk and took a slow, predatory step toward her, entirely erasing the distance she had just tried to put between them. Harrison has just proven himself utterly useless, Jude stated, his voice losing its icy edge. He didn't step closer, but the sheer weight of his focused attention felt like a physical force. His sharp silver eyes quickly scanned her face, assessing her not as an intruder, but with a sudden, profound respect. I need someone who isn't afraid of me, someone who actually has the spine to tell me when the ship is sinking, and the sheer, unadulterated brilliance to fix it. Mr. Sterling, I'm just a junior analyst. You were a junior analyst, Jude corrected smoothly. A spark of genuine admiration replaced the cynical coldness in his gaze. As of this exact moment, Miss Sawyer, you are my new senior financial analyst. Your salary is tripled. You report directly to me, and you start right now. That night, Ellie went to bed with her mind still spinning from the sheer whirlwind of her sudden promotion. When the pale light of the next morning spilled across her sheets, it dragged her from a restless, feverish sleep. The phantom weight of Jude Sterling's intense, assessing gaze had haunted her through the long night. Now, standing in the center of the 50th floor, the intoxicating tension of their first meeting bled into a daunting reality. She was no longer a face in the crowd. She was no longer ignored. Senior Financial Analyst. The title carried a staggering weight, a sudden, dizzying elevation in London's ruthless corporate hierarchy. Yesterday, she had been a disposable subordinate, terrified of a middle manager's wrath. Today, she stood inside a pristine, glass-walled office situated directly adjacent to the lion's den. Her name was already etched in frosted lettering on the door. The transition had been blindingly fast, dragging her from the shadows and thrusting her straight into the scorching, unforgiving glare of the executive floor. She wasn't here to fetch coffee or manage his calendar. She was here to dissect empires. The Vanguard acquisition. A voice struck the glass, deep and dark as a midnight bell. Ellie jumped, her pulse immediately spiking into a frantic, hammering rhythm. Jude stood in the doorway. He wore a tailored suit of midnight blue, a stark, commanding contrast to the pale gray skies weeping rain over London. He dominated the space instantly, exuding an aura of absolute, unyielding authority that stole the very breath from her lungs. He didn't offer a polite good morning. He didn't smile. He simply crossed the threshold, tossing a leather-bound portfolio onto her sleek new desk. He stepped close. Too close. The scent of rain and rich, spicy cedar wrapped around her senses, a dangerous, intoxicating tether. I need the risk margins recalculated by noon, he commanded, his silver eyes locking onto hers with a piercing, predatory heat. The board believes Vanguard is a safe harbor. I believe they are hiding a debt spiral in their offshore subsidiaries. Find the leak, Miss Sawyer. Prove me right. Ellie swallowed the sudden, heavy dryness in her throat. She gripped the edge of her desk, grounding herself in the cold, hard wood to keep from drowning in the intense, magnetic pull of his gaze. The offshore accounts? She countered, her voice remarkably steady, despite the chaotic storm within. If they routed the debt through the Cayman branches, it will be buried in Tier 3 derivatives. It's a labyrinth, Mr. Sterling. A calculated, complex maze. Jude leaned down, planting his large hands flat on her desk, caging her in. The space between them vanished. The air grew thick, electric, heavy with a simmering, unspoken desire. Then navigate it, Ellie. The sound of her first name on his lips was a dark, silken caress. It sent a wild, forbidden shiver racing down her spine. I don't hire people to stare at the walls, he murmured, his gaze dropping for one heated, agonizing second to the rapid pulse fluttering at the base of her throat. I promoted you because you see the truth when everyone else is blinded by the gold. Find the debt. He pushed off the desk and walked away, the powerful, panther-like grace of his strides eating up the distance. Ellie released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands trembled as she reached for the Vanguard portfolio. The game had changed. The stakes were high, and the man demanding her brilliance was a dangerous, devastating distraction. "I won't be a fool. I will keep this strictly professional," she chanted silently, an internal mantra to shield her battered heart. She had trusted a charming man once. Derek had promised her the world, only to dismantle her self-worth while sleeping with her best friend. Derek had taught her that confident men were built of beautiful, destructive lies. She had moved to London to heal, to work, to survive. She would not surrender her hard-won independence to a billionaire CEO who could crush her with a single, careless word. She opened the file. She buried her fear in the numbers. The day dissolved into a relentless, grueling pace. The 50th floor operated at a speed that defied gravity. Millions of pounds shifted on a whispered word. Corporate fates were sealed with a stroke of Jude's pen. Through it all, Ellie remained anchored to her screens, her brilliant mind slicing through the Vanguard data like a silver blade. She found the discrepancy at 11:45, a ghost account, a phantom ledger bleeding capital into a shell corporation. Triumph flared in her chest, a bright, fierce spark in the dark. She grabbed her tablet, bypassed the adjoining door, and stepped into Jude's cavernous office. He was off the phone, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the weeping city. The stormy gray light cast harsh, dramatic shadows across the sharp planes of his face. He looked isolated, untouchable, a solitary king surveying a kingdom he didn't entirely trust. "You were right," Ellie said, breaking the heavy, opulent silence. Jude turned slowly. The predatory stillness returned, but this time, it was laced with a dark, glittering fascination. She crossed the room, the click of her heels a steady, rhythmic beat against the marble floor. She didn't hesitate. She didn't cower. She walked straight into his orbit, handing him the tablet. "Tier 3 derivatives, just as you suspected," she explained, her voice breathless but bold. They masked a £40 million deficit using a revolving credit line from a dummy corporation in the Caymans. If you absorb Vanguard, you absorb a sinking ship. Jude didn't look at the screen. He looked at her. He took the tablet, his bare fingers brushing accidentally against hers. The physical contact was brief, a fleeting, reckless collision of skin, but the red-hot spark that ignited between them was powerful enough to burn the entire building to the ground. "You found it in 3 hours," he said, his voice dropping to that private, gravelly frequency that made her knees feel weak. "My entire analytics division missed it for a month." "Your analytics division relies on automated algorithms," Ellie replied, lifting her chin, fighting the urge to step back from the overwhelming heat radiating from his chest. "Algorithms don't understand human greed, Mr. Sterling. People who are hiding money leave a specific kind of trail, a desperate one." A slow, devastatingly handsome smirk touched the corner of his lips. It transformed his ruthless face into something sinfully, terribly tempting. "And you understand desperation, Miss Sawyer?" "I understand survival," she whispered back, the truth slipping out before she could build the wall to stop it. The atmosphere in the room shifted, tightening into a taut, vibrating wire. Jude's silver eyes darkened, turning from ice to molten steel. He stepped closer, the scent of cedar wrapped around her, pulling her under. He was looking at her not as an employee, not as an analyst, but as a woman who had just matched him, mind for mind, in his own ruthless arena. "Cancel your evening plans," he ordered softly, the command wrapped in velvet. "The Vanguard board is attempting a hostile push tonight. We have to tear down their valuation before the market opens tomorrow. It will be a late night." Ellie swallowed hard. A late night, alone on the 50th floor. Just the numbers, the storm, and the simmering, undeniable fire burning between them. "I don't have evening plans," she murmured. "Good." His gaze lingered on her lips for a second too long. "Neither do I." The sun surrendered to the dark, and the city lights sparked like diamonds in the black. The penthouse floor emptied, leaving them isolated in the sky, trapped in a silent, glass-walled world of high finance and heavy breathing. They worked at his private conference table, a massive slab of polished obsidian. Blueprints, ledgers, and digital tablets were scattered between them, The professional boundaries began to fray, blurring at the edges as the hours bled away. Jude had discarded his jacket and tie hours ago. The sleeves of his crisp white shirt were rolled up, revealing strong, corded forearms. Ellie had kicked off her heels, curling her feet beneath her in the plush leather chair, her hair tumbling in messy, golden-brown waves over her shoulders. The rhythm of their work was a hypnotic, intimate dance. He would propose a strategy, she would counter with a data point. They moved in tandem, anticipating each other's thoughts, a seamless alignment of two fiercely intelligent minds. It was intoxicating. It was terrifying. "Look at the margin on page 4, Jude said, his voice a low, raspy rumble in the quiet room. He leaned over to point at the document in front of her. He didn't walk around the table. He leaned right beside her, his broad chest brushing against her shoulder. The heat of his body enveloped her. The scent of him was everywhere. "The margin is thin," Ellie replied, her voice trembling, fighting the violent shiver within. "It's non-existent," Jude corrected, turning his head. His face was inches from hers. So close she could see the dark, thick sweep of his eyelashes, the slight stubble shadowing his strong jaw, the primal, raw hunger burning in his silver eyes. The numbers on the page vanished. The world outside the glass disappeared. There was only the heavy, ragged sound of their breathing, mingling in the quiet space between them. Jude lifted his hand. Slowly, deliberately, he tucked a stray curl of hair behind her ear. His knuckles grazed her hot cheek, sending a shockwave of pure, unadulterated longing straight to her core. "You are extraordinary," he whispered, his gaze dropping to her mouth. "A brilliant, beautiful contradiction. You tremble when I walk into a room, yet you are the only person brave enough to stand in my way." Ellie's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, desperate bird trapped in a cage. She wanted him. The realization crashed over her with terrifying force. She wanted to lean forward. She wanted to taste the power and the passion that radiated from his lips. But the ghost of Derek's cruel laughter echoed in her mind. "You're so naive, Ellie. Did you really think you were enough?" Panic, cold and sharp, sliced through the haze of desire. She couldn't do this. She couldn't surrender to another man who held all the power, a man who could destroy her with a whim. Ellie flinched, pulling away from his touch, as if she had been burned. She stood up abruptly, the leather chair scraping harshly against the floor. "The Vanguard portfolio is complete," she said, her voice brittle, desperate to rebuild her shattered professional walls. "The numbers are solid. We can destroy their valuation in the morning." Jude froze, his hand still hovering in the empty air where her cheek had been. The vulnerability vanished from his eyes, instantly replaced by a guarded, impenetrable shield of ice. He slowly straightened, the billionaire tyrant returning in a heartbeat. "Of course," he said smoothly, his voice devoid of all the warmth and heat from a moment before. He looked at her, his eyes assessing, calculating the sudden, desperate walls she had thrown up between them. "Excellent work, Miss Sawyer. You may go." Ellie grabbed her shoes and her bag, fleeing the conference room, fleeing the penthouse, fleeing the terrifying realization that she was already falling. Jude stood alone in the dark office, listening to the soft chime of the elevator doors closing. He looked at the empty chair beside him, the scent of her sweet, floral perfume still lingering in the air. She was running. He could see the shadows of past betrayals haunting her beautiful eyes. She had built a fortress around her heart. A dark, possessive vow settled deep in Jude's chest, ringing clear and true. He was a man who dismantled empires for sport. Tearing down the walls around Elizabeth Sawyer's heart would simply be his next great conquest. By the time Ellie returned to the office the next day, the bright morning sun did nothing to dispel the heavy, electric tension that had settled over the 50th floor. Ellie sat at her mahogany desk, her eyes fixed blindly on the flickering financial tickers across her monitor. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the phantom heat of Jude's hand covering hers. She felt the heavy, ragged rhythm of his breathing from the night before. The memory of her own desperate, panicked flight from his office tasted like copper on her tongue. She had run. She had let the ghosts of her past dictate her professional reality. When the adjoining door finally opened at precisely 9 o'clock, Ellie braced herself. Jude stepped into the room. He wore a stunning bespoke suit in a sharp, unforgiving gray, looking entirely unaffected by the charged intimacy of the previous night. The ruthless CEO was back in complete control, his emotional walls reinforced with impenetrable steel. "We are attending a working luncheon at the St. James Club at 1 o'clock, Jude commanded, his tone brisk and entirely business-focused. He didn't look at her face. He looked directly at the Vanguard dossiers on her desk. "We are formally withdrawing from the merger. My mother will be there representing the Sterling Family Trust, along with Anita Kensington. The Kensington Group was poised to co-invest, and they need to be briefed on the Cayman deficit before the news hits the markets." Ellie blinked, grounding herself in the data to mask her sudden nerves. "Understood. I have the audit summaries prepared." "Good. Be ready to walk them through the numbers," Jude said, finally dragging his gaze up to meet hers. There was a brief, imperceptible softening in his silver eyes before the CEO mask firmly locked back into place. "St. James is notoriously formal. I trust you are prepared for that." "I am," Ellie replied smoothly. She was wearing her best tailored navy suit and a crisp white silk blouse, an outfit she had saved for months to purchase. It was professional, impeccable, and entirely her own. 3 hours later, the hushed, cavernous dining room of the St. James Club threatened to swallow her whole. The air smelled of expensive cigars, roasted lamb, and centuries of entrenched power. The maitre d' guided them to a secluded, private alcove overlooking a manicured courtyard. Sitting beneath the glow of an antique chandelier were 2 women who looked as though they had been carved from diamonds and ice. Eleanor Sterling sat with the rigid, flawless posture of royalty. Her icy blonde hair was perfectly coiffed, her features sharp and aristocratic, bearing a striking resemblance to Jude. She held 30% of the Sterling Enterprise Trust, making her one of the most powerful women in Europe. Beside her sat Anita Kensington. She was devastatingly polished, with a glossy raven blowout, a subtle but astronomically expensive designer day dress, and a smile that never quite reached her dark eyes. As the representative of her family's massive investment firm, and Jude's former girlfriend, she occupied a space of easy, untouchable privilege. "Jude, darling," Eleanor greeted, extending a graceful hand. "It has been entirely too long. You are working far too hard." "Duty calls, mother," Jude replied smoothly, kissing her cheek with genuine, practiced respect. He turned to Anita, offering a polite, entirely platonic nod. "Anita, thank you for joining us on such short notice. The Kensington Group's flexibility is always appreciated." "For you, Jude? Always," Anita purred, her voice a soft, musical hum. She touched his forearm briefly, a gesture of casual familiarity, before her dark eyes slid past him, landing on Ellie. The smile on Anita's face remained perfectly, rigidly pleasant. "And who is this? I don't believe we've met." Jude placed a steady hand on the small of Ellie's back, guiding her forward. "This is Elizabeth Sawyer. She is the senior financial analyst for my acquisitions division. Ellie, my mother, Eleanor Sterling, and Anita Kensington." "A senior analyst?" Eleanor echoed, her perfectly arched eyebrows rising a fraction of an inch. She offered a slow, gracious smile that felt entirely like a closed door. "How remarkably industrious. You look so very young, and quite brave, tackling Mayfair in such practical attire." The microaggression was so smooth, so polished, it was almost invisible. Ellie felt a cold knot form in her stomach. She recognized this game. Derek's friends had played it flawlessly. The smiling condescension, the subtle reminders of class disparity, the invisible lines drawn in the sand. But she was no longer the naive girl, desperate for approval. She offered a polite, professional smile in return, taking her seat. "Thank you, Lady Sterling. Practicality is a necessity when dissecting £300 million deficits. One must ensure nothing gets in the way of the data." Anita let out a soft, tinkling laugh, taking a sip of her sparkling water. "Oh, how wonderfully driven. It is so refreshing to see young women prioritizing their careers over everything else. Tell me, Elizabeth, where did you study? I don't recall seeing you at the Oxford alumni galas." "I attended a state university back in America," Ellie answered evenly, her natural American accent suddenly feeling stark and foreign against their clipped, upper-class British vowels, as she smoothed her napkin over her lap. "America," Eleanor murmured, sharing a brief, sympathetic look with Anita. "How lovely. It is so important that public, overseas universities are given opportunities to integrate into the corporate sphere. Jude has always been so passionately dedicated to charitable hiring initiatives." The insult hung heavy over the table, thinly veiled as a philanthropic compliment. They were smiling at her, practically radiating aristocratic superiority, entirely united in their mission to make Ellie feel like a stray dog allowed at the dining table for amusement. Ellie's jaw tightened, but she kept her expression flawlessly blank. She wouldn't bleed for them. She refused. "Actually, Lady Sterling, the firm hired me based on my algorithmic risk models, which outperformed the legacy systems during the last fiscal quarter. But I do appreciate your support of merit-based integration." Anita's smile tightened slightly at the corners, the only sign that Ellie's parry had landed. Jude, who had been reviewing a wine list, looked up. He was entirely blind to the venom woven into the women's polite small talk. To him, this was simply how his mother and her peers spoke, an endless, tiresome stream of aristocratic posturing. He viewed Anita as a harmless business associate, their romantic history a closed chapter he had long since moved past. But as Jude looked at Ellie, he noticed the rigid line of her shoulders. He noticed the quiet, defensive stillness she had adopted. He didn't like it. Jude set the wine list down, leaning forward and resting his forearms on the heavy linen tablecloth. He commanded the space instantly, drawing the focus of the entire table. "My hiring initiatives have nothing to do with charity, Mother," Jude stated, his voice calm, gravelly, and ringing with absolute authority. "And Miss Sawyer is entirely too modest. The reason we are having this luncheon today is because my entire executive board, including the Kensington Group's analysts, missed a massive, toxic debt structure hidden within the Vanguard acquisition." He turned his head, his silver eyes locking onto Ellie. The respect and admiration in his gaze were so intense they practically stole her breath. "Ellie found it," Jude continued, turning his attention back to the two women. "She worked through the night, untangled a labyrinth of Cayman shell corporations, and saved this firm, and your trust, Mother, from absorbing a catastrophic loss. Her mind is unparalleled. She is, without question, the most invaluable asset currently operating within Sterling Enterprises." The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor's smile froze entirely. To be corrected by her son in public was an indignity. To have a public university, off-the-rack analyst elevated above their own financial advisors, was a declaration of war. Anita took a slow, deliberate sip of her water, her dark eyes flashing with a sudden, vicious calculation. "Well," she managed, her voice tight but impossibly sweet, "we certainly owe you a debt of gratitude, Elizabeth. How fortunate for Jude that you are so devoted to his needs." "I am devoted to the firm's stability," Ellie corrected softly, holding Anita's gaze without blinking. The rest of the luncheon proceeded smoothly on the surface. They discussed the legal parameters of the withdrawal and the press strategy. Ellie spoke only when addressed regarding the data, her voice measured and authoritative. Every time Eleanor or Anita attempted to subtly undermine her, they found no purchase on Ellie's flawless professional armor. When the plates were finally cleared and the polite, icy goodbyes exchanged, Jude and Ellie stepped out into the crisp, biting afternoon of Mayfair. As the chauffeur opened the door to the Bentley, Jude paused, looking down at her. "You handled them perfectly," he murmured, his voice a low rumble meant only for her. "They are entirely too accustomed to people bowing to their titles. I appreciate your composure." Ellie looked up, meeting his intense silver gaze. He genuinely didn't know. He hadn't seen the hidden daggers, but he had stepped in to defend her anyway, lifting her up simply because he believed in her brilliance. It was a dangerous, intoxicating realization. As they slid into the quiet, leather-scented cocoon of the back seat, the space between them felt electrified. Ellie felt the warmth of his shoulder brushing against hers. She had survived the luncheon. She hadn't let the vipers see her bleed. But as the car pulled away from the curb, Ellie knew with a terrifying certainty that she had just put a massive, unerasable target on her own back. And looking at Jude, knowing he was the reason why, she realized the most terrifying truth of all. She didn't want to run anymore. Hours later, the digital clock on the lower corner of Ellie's monitor flicked to 11:42 p.m. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling glass of the penthouse, London was a sprawling, glittering sea of amber streetlights and rain-slicked pavement. Inside, the 50th floor was a fortress of silent, focused intensity. The fallout from the Vanguard withdrawal had been catastrophic, just as Jude had predicted. The markets had panicked, the financial press was demanding answers, and the Sterling Enterprises legal team had been scrambling since the moment Jude formally killed the deal at the St. James Club. For the past 10 hours, Ellie had been entirely submerged in the crisis. She had built stabilization models, drafted risk aversion projections, and fed Jude the precise data he needed to ruthlessly dismantle every argument the frantic board of directors threw at him. She rubbed her burning eyes, the blue light of the screen searing into her retinas. Her shoulders ached with a dull, throbbing tension, and she was entirely certain she had forgotten to eat dinner. A heavy, leather-bound portfolio abruptly slid across her desk, covering her keyboard. Ellie startled, her breath catching in her throat. Jude stood beside her desk. He had discarded his suit jacket and tie hours ago. The top 2 buttons of his crisp white shirt were undone, and his sleeves were rolled to the elbows, revealing the corded, tanned muscles of his forearms. The harsh, fluorescent lighting of the office should have made him look exhausted. Instead, the late hour simply stripped away the polished veneer of the billionaire CEO, leaving behind a raw, primal energy that was intensely intimidating. "Stop," Jude commanded. The gravelly timbre of his voice was low, vibrating with absolute, intoxicating authority in the quiet room. "I just need to finish the quarterly projection mapping," Ellie protested, reaching for the portfolio to move it aside. "If the Asian markets open and see the temporary dip in liquid assets, they might—" Jude's hand clamped down over hers. The contact was immediate and electric. The sudden, scorching heat of his palm against her chilled skin sent a violent shiver racing up her arm, straight to her chest. Ellie froze, her wide hazel eyes snapping up to meet his. "The Asian markets can wait," Jude said softly, his silver eyes dark and unreadable. He didn't release her hand. His thumb shifted, brushing lightly over her knuckles in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. "You have been staring at those screens since we returned from Mayfair. You are exhausted, you are running on caffeine, and you are going to burn yourself out." "I'm fine," she lied, her voice entirely too breathless. "You are a terrible liar, Elizabeth." He gently but firmly pulled her hand away from the keyboard, stepping back to create a fraction of space between them. "Come into my office. Now." It wasn't a request. Ellie swallowed hard, her pulse hammering a frantic beat against her ribs. She stood up, her legs feeling remarkably unsteady, and followed him through the heavy adjoining door. The atmosphere in Jude's cavernous office was entirely different. The main overhead lights were off, leaving the room bathed in the soft, intimate glow of the city skyline and a single amber desk lamp. Spread across the center of his massive obsidian desk were 2 steaming cartons of expensive, imported Thai food. "Sit," Jude ordered, gesturing to one of the plush leather chairs opposite his desk. He didn't take the imposing, high-backed CEO chair. Instead, he pulled the other guest chair around, sitting mere feet away from her. Ellie sank into the soft leather, entirely out of her depth. The aroma of lemongrass and chili suddenly made her stomach twist with a violent hunger she hadn't realized she was harboring. Jude handed her a set of chopsticks and a carton. "Eat." They ate in a heavy, charged silence. The simple act of sharing a late-night meal felt entirely too domestic, stripping away the rigid corporate hierarchy that usually separated them. Ellie kept her eyes on her food, hyper-aware of his presence. He was so large, so overwhelmingly masculine, and being this close to him in the shadowed quiet of the penthouse was systematically dismantling her defenses. "You handled yourself remarkably well today," Jude said suddenly, his deep voice breaking the silence. Ellie paused, her chopsticks hovering. "At the luncheon?" "Yes," Jude set his carton down on the glass table, leaning forward, resting his forearms on his knees. The proximity brought the sharp, intoxicating scent of his cedar cologne washing over her. My mother is not an easy woman to navigate. She demands perfection, and she does not suffer outsiders gladly. Most of my executives trip over themselves trying to impress her. You didn't flinch. Ellie looked down, a bitter, phantom ache tightening her chest. You don't know the half of it, she thought. He hadn't heard the venom. He hadn't seen the condescending smiles. I'm not easily intimidated by wealth, Mr. Sterling, she said quietly. Jude, her head snapped up. His silver eyes were locked onto hers, intense and burning with an unspoken demand. It is nearly midnight. There is no one within 50 floors of us. My name is Jude. Jude, she whispered. The name felt like a dangerous indulgence on her tongue. He watched her, his gaze tracking the subtle flush creeping up her neck. You aren't intimidated by wealth, he agreed slowly, his eyes narrowing in calculated assessment. But you are guarded, fiercely so. You built a wall around yourself the moment we sat down at that table. You expected them to attack you. Ellie's breath hitched. His intellect was terrifying. He missed nothing. I expected them to judge me, Ellie corrected carefully, setting her food aside. The sudden, suffocating weight in the room made it impossible to eat. I am a recently promoted senior financial analyst from an American state university, wearing an off-the-rack suit. In their world, I am a discrepancy. People who occupy those spheres rarely tolerate discrepancies. Jude's jaw tightened. Who taught you that? The question was sharp, demanding. It wasn't a casual inquiry. It was an interrogation. Ellie looked away, staring out at the rain, streaking down the glass. The shadows of her past clawed at the edges of her mind. She had sworn never to talk about Derek. She had sworn never to let another man see the humiliating wreckage of her past. But sitting here in the dark, bathed in the protective, intense focus of Jude Sterling, the walls she had spent 6 months fortifying began to crumble. Someone who claimed to love me, Ellie murmured, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Her voice was incredibly soft, fragile, barely carrying over the hum of the air conditioning. Jude went perfectly still. He was from that world, Ellie continued, her hands twisting tightly in her lap. She didn't look at Jude. She couldn't bear to see pity in his fierce eyes. He was wealthy, polished, connected. For 3 years, he told me I was lucky he tolerated me. He brought me to his social events, let his friends make subtle jokes at my expense, and convinced me that my lack of pedigree meant I owed him absolute devotion. A suffocating tension filled the office. The air grew thick, heavy with the phantom presence of a man Jude suddenly, violently, wanted to destroy. And then? Jude prompted, his voice dropping to a lethally quiet register. Ellie swallowed the lump in her throat, a humorless, broken smile touching her lips. And then I came home early from work, one afternoon, and found him in our bed with my best friend. She had the right pedigree, apparently. The silence that followed was deafening. Jude stared at the beautiful, brilliant woman sitting across from him. He saw the faint tremor in her slender fingers, the devastating vulnerability in the rigid line of her shoulders. She had been systematically broken down by a coward, a weak, pathetic man who had used money and status to mask his own profound inadequacies, entirely failing to realize he held an absolute diamond in his grasp. A surge of possessive fury, hotter and more violent than anything Jude had ever experienced, erupted in his chest. It completely bypassed his cynical nature, shattering the icy detachment he had cultivated his entire life. He didn't do messy emotions. He didn't care about the personal lives of his employees. But as Jude looked at Ellie, he realized with a terrifying absolute certainty that she wasn't just an employee. She was the most captivating, resilient, fiercely intelligent woman he had ever met, and the thought of anyone making her feel small made him want to burn the city to the ground. Jude stood up. He crossed the small space between them in a single, predatory stride. Before Ellie could react, he reached down, his large hands gripping her arms, and gently pulled her to her feet. She gasped, her hands instinctively coming up to rest flat against his chest. His heart was hammering a furious, heavy rhythm against her palms. Jude stepped in, entirely erasing the distance between them. He bracketed her against his body, lifting one hand to cup her face. His long fingers buried themselves in the hair at the nape of her neck, tilting her head up until she was forced to look directly into his eyes. The silver was gone, replaced by a dark, molten storm of pure, unadulterated desire. "Listen to me," Jude commanded, his voice a ragged, breathless rasp. His thumb stroked fiercely across her cheekbone. That man was a fool, a blind, pathetic coward who couldn't handle a woman whose intellect and strength eclipsed his own. "Jude," she whispered, entirely overwhelmed by the suffocating intensity of his focus. "No," he interrupted, leaning down until his mouth was a hair's breadth from hers. The heat of his breath washed over her parted lips, intoxicating and dangerous. "Do not let the ghost of a lesser man dictate your worth. You are brilliant. You are beautiful. You walked into my office and demanded my attention, and you have entirely consumed it ever since." Ellie's mind short-circuited. The corporate world, the ledgers, the hovering threat of his mother and Anita, it all vanished. There was only Jude, the powerful, protective weight of his body, the desperate, hungry look in his eyes. He didn't kiss her. It took every ounce of his legendary iron control, but he didn't kiss her. He knew if he tasted her now, while the ghosts of her past were still bleeding into the room, she would convince herself it was a mistake by morning. Instead, Jude pressed his forehead against hers. He closed his eyes, inhaling the sweet, floral scent of her skin, allowing the terrifying reality of his own feelings to fully settle into his bones. He didn't just want to take her to bed. He wanted to protect her. He wanted to elevate her. He wanted to possess her heart so entirely that she would never remember what it felt like to be afraid. "Go home, Ellie," Jude whispered into the darkness, his voice raw with the effort it took to step back. He released her slowly, as if tearing away a piece of his own soul. "Before I forget entirely who I am, and do something we both know you aren't ready for." The next morning, miles away from the penthouse, the mood was completely different. The drawing room of Elizabeth Sterling's Belgravia townhouse was a masterpiece of Georgian architecture and suffocating silence. The air was heavy with the scent of lilies and hundred-year-old dust, a fitting tomb for the aristocratic legacy Eleanor guarded so viciously. Anita Kensington sat poised on the edge of a silk-upholstered chaise lounge, a delicate porcelain teacup balanced perfectly on her knee. Outwardly, she was the picture of serene, high-society grace. Inwardly, she was practically vibrating with a cold, corrosive rage. 3 days had passed since the luncheon at the St. James Club. 3 days since Jude had calmly and firmly defended his new senior financial analyst. But to Eleanor and Anita, his polite refusal to side with their aristocratic pedigree over an American outsider felt like a brutal, unforgivable humiliation. "She is a parasite," Eleanor murmured, her voice as smooth and lethal as a silver blade. She didn't look up from the philanthropic guest list she was reviewing. "Jude has always had a rebellious streak, but this is entirely intolerable. Elevating an outsider to his inner circle simply because she caught a mathematical error. It makes the family look weak." Anita took a slow, measured sip of her Earl Grey. "It isn't just the promotion, Eleanor. You saw the way he looked at her. He is utterly captivated. She has played the innocent, hard-working victim to absolute perfection, and Jude's protective instincts have completely blinded him." "Then we must open his eyes," Eleanor replied simply, finally lifting her icy gaze. "Jude is a cynic at his core. He despises public emotional displays, and he loathes being used. If Elizabeth Sawyer were to suddenly become a source of cheap, public embarrassment, Jude's infatuation would curdle into disgust overnight." A slow, predatory smile curved Anita's crimson lips. She set her teacup down and reached for the sleek silver tablet resting on the mahogany side table. "I completely agree," Anita purred, "which is why I hired a private intelligence firm the moment we left Mayfair. If one wants to dismantle a saint, one must first find the dirt they are trying to bury." Anita swiped across the screen, her manicured nail tapping against a digital dossier. Elizabeth Sawyer was frustratingly clean on paper. No debt, no criminal record, excellent academic marks. But people were never truly clean. Everyone left a digital footprint, a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to their deepest vulnerabilities. Her life in London is a blank slate, Anita explained, her eyes glittering with dark triumph. Because she fled her hometown 6 months ago, it seems our pristine, brilliant analyst was involved in a remarkably messy domestic implosion. Anita turned the tablet, sliding it across the antique table toward Eleanor. The screen displayed a photograph of a man. He was handsome in a cheap, flashy sort of way, overstyled hair, a smug smile, and a desperately curated social media presence that screamed of profound insecurity. His name is Derek, Anita said softly, the venom practically dripping from her tongue. He is an obscure, mid-level regional manager at a logistics firm, and until 6 months ago, he was Elizabeth's boyfriend of 3 years. That is, until she walked in on him, entertaining her best friend in their shared apartment. Eleanor stared at the photograph, her perfectly arched eyebrows drawing together in aristocratic distaste. How remarkably common. But how does this help us? Derek is deeply arrogant, and currently seeking funding for a dreadful tech startup, Anita explained, leaning back against the silk cushions. He is exactly the kind of man who believes he belongs in our world, despite entirely lacking the pedigree. I had one of the Kensington Group's ghost subsidiaries reach out to him yesterday. We told him an anonymous angel investor wants to fly him to London this weekend to discuss a massive seed capital injection. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, the ruthless intelligence of the Sterling matriarch suddenly catching the thread of the web Anita was weaving. The Sterling Foundation Charity Gala is this Saturday, Anita continued, her smile widening into something truly wicked. Jude has commanded the entire executive board to attend. Elizabeth will undoubtedly be there, desperately trying to play the part of the billionaire's new muse. We simply arrange an all-access VIP pass for Derek. We point him in her direction. Eleanor reached out, gently closing the leather cover of the tablet. The faintest ghost of a smile touched her icy features. Derek corners her, Eleanor finished, her tone ringing with absolute, clinical detachment. He causes a scene. He drags her back into the mud she came from, and Jude, who despises nothing more than being associated with low-class drama, witnesses the entire sordid affair. Exactly, Anita breathed. Jude will realize she isn't a brilliant prodigy. She is just a pathetic girl, carrying a mountain of messy, provincial baggage. He will discard her before the night is over. The trap was set. The vipers simply had to wait for their prey to walk into it. That is where we leave Ellie and Jude for now, right on the edge of everything. Part 2 is coming in a few days, and trust me, you do not want to miss it. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and I will see you there.